Welcome to the Stories Told podcast. This is episode 14, If Star Wars Was a Fairy Tale. This is the Stories Told podcast. Two authors talking about stories in movies, TV, and of course, books.
I'm Michael Grayford. I write action-adventure stories in fantasy and sci-fi worlds, sometimes for younger readers and sometimes for adults. And I try to always inject at least a little bit of humor.
And I am author E.W. Barnes, and I write action-adventure, time travel novels, and space opera science fiction. Thousands of years, thousands of worlds. But be forewarned, beyond here, there will be spoilers. Are you ready for the adventure? Let's begin. And welcome back to the Stories Told podcast. How are you doing today, Mike?
I'm doing great. It's good to be back.
And I really enjoyed our conversation about Star Wars last week. It was so much fun.
I agree. Like I said, I could talk Star Wars for hours.
And, I'm kind of the same way about Star Trek and The Lord of the Rings. So when we get to that, you're forewarned.
Okay, good to know.
And if folks haven't yet heard the podcast where we talked about the original Star Wars, I'll put a link at the top of the video right here. Okay, so how are things going with your Zara novels?
I've got a few things I'm working on now.
Yeah?
Different points in different books. I'm working on some concept art for a couple of my stories to use for promotion and for social media, to have some imagery to go along with text descriptions, excerpts, things like that. Right now I'm tweaking the blurbs for Zara and the Golden Scarab of Balahar. I have a few different ones, different takes on the story, trying to narrow that down and polish it up so I can use that for social media presentation and also for the book description on Amazon, things like that.
Yeah.
And then I'm slowly writing the sequel to that, Zara 2, The Wrath of Sekhmet. Still working on that one. And then, what's the last thing I'm doing? I finished the alpha draft for The Deep Dark, which is a action, adventure, sci-fi, horror, thriller kind of story. I've got the alpha done, and I'm going to be tweaking, trying to amp up the emotion a bit on that to make it a little more tense.
Okay. And for anyone who wants to check out Mike's works and the progress on his work, I recommend going to his website. He has got the coolest progress bars available on the website to be able to show you where things are going with those novels. So I saw recently that you're almost done with book 1.
Yes.
And is that almost done as in posted to Vella, or almost done as in finishing the writing?
Almost done as in finishing the writing. The way I set up the progress bars is that once it gets to 100%, that means I've done all the writing. So it's gone through all the passes and the final editing. And it's ready to be put into Amazon and whatever other bookstores. So, there's a process after you're done writing to actually get it out into the world. So that's now part of the 100%. Right. So 100% is me done writing it. So I'm almost there. I've got it out to the editor now. I'm waiting for feedback and then do another couple passes on that.
Very cool.
How about you? Where are you at with things?
Well, I actually sort of took a little bit of a detour this week because I have an opportunity to submit 500 words for an anthology. And so I thought I'd give that a try. So I crafted the 500 words, and the goal is to make it hooky enough for the first reviewer of the anthology to want to pass it along to, the next reviewers. So if it's successful in being included in that anthology, I will let all our listeners know what it is and where they can find it. And if it's not, then I essentially have a short story that I can offer to my newsletter subscribers for free. So for me, it's a win-win regardless of what happens.
Sure. Yeah, that's great. So it's 500 words?
Just the first 500
First
words
500, okay.
is what you submit in order to see if it's hooky enough to be considered to go further. So, which is actually a little bit of that's actually a little difficult for me because I write a little bit more of a slow burn style.
I was going to say the same thing. Like, short stories are very difficult for me.
Yeah.
I want to plan out a whole story, take some time getting into it. My short stories tend to be, here's an idea, and it's like in and out in like 1,000 words. Just I'm not doing much development of anything.
Well, and I will say I actually like writing short stories, but it takes a different mindset. You've got to kind of shift gears a little bit. My novels are going to be a little bit more, sort of getting going and lots of interesting detail and layers and clues to what's going on. And with the short story, you got to just jump right in.
Yeah, definitely.
Which I do in novels too, but it's a different kind of jump right in. Like in the novels, it's actually sort of like we went to see Guardians of the Galaxy 3 this weekend. And I didn't actually get to go right in immediately because I was a little late arriving, and that's a whole different story, is what I won't bore people with. But I was a little late arriving, but I knew what was going to be happening. What was going to be happening was we were going to be jumping right into an action scene with cool music in the background before we got to the bulk of the story.
Right.
So that's kind of how my novels go too. We have an action scene at the beginning before we get into the bulk of the story. But with a short story, you got to have an action scene that's in the bulk of the story right away.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And the last short story that I had included in an anthology, which the anthology is called The Gilded Glass. And it's an anthology with a focus on mirrors. And so I wrote a short story, science fiction short story called The Reflector. And that's available on Amazon if people want to find it. Or I also sometimes give it away to my newsletter list. So if you join my newsletter, you can get The Reflector when I give it away infrequently, because I can do that now because the rights have reverted back to me.
Oh, great.
So anyway, so that's where I am. That's what I did this week. I worked really hard on writing and polishing and writing and polishing and writing and polishing 500 words.
Excellent.
And so have you come across any great stories this week?
This week? Let me think. Nothing in our realm that we're talking like science fiction, fantasy type thing. Mostly just been focusing on my own stories, getting those going. And then just watching some TV here and there. I think I was watching Ted Lasso maybe the last few days.
Good things about that show.
It's a good show. I like it.
Well, I am continuing to read a Brandon Sanderson novel. It's part of his, I think it's called the Stormlight series.
Yeah, Stormlight Archive.
And I'm reading book 2. Yeah, Stormlight Archive. Thank you. And I'm reading book 2. And I have to say, I love how chunky these books are. I mean, it's just, what is it, 3 inches thick?
Yeah, I remember listening to his the podcast that they do, Writing Excuses podcast. And I remember him talking about it when he was working on the first one. He was saying like, yeah, I have 500,000 words this year on the first book. Like, wow, that's pretty solid.
As a reader, though, with a book that I'm enjoying, I love it.
That's great.
So when I sit down with that book, it's sort of like sliding into a jacuzzi, right? Just kind of getting comfortable and warm and just getting lost in the story. So I have really been enjoying the story.
Excellent. Yeah, I love a good meaty fantasy story.
Yeah. So let's get started then. Let's talk about Willow. So Willow was released in 1988. Did you know that? Did it feel like it was that long ago?
I actually thought it came out, well, first of all, nothing feels like it was that long ago. Like time just kind of compresses when I look into the past. But I was actually thinking it came out earlier than that. Maybe 94, 90, or 84, 85, something like that. But yeah, I knew it was in the 80s era.
Yeah, and it was post Top Gun for Val Kilmer.
Is that true? Yeah, I guess that's right.
And so I think probably that was one of the reasons he was chosen and why he may have chosen the film, because after Top Gun, he had that extraordinary recognition based on the popularity of that movie, and it broke any kind of typing that may have been applied to him, moving out of the military sort of genre and into the fantasy genre was probably a very thoughtful decision on his part.
I agree. I suspect we'll be talking more about Val Kilmer over the course of this discussion. I know I have some thoughts on his character and sort of how he fits into this world and his career and that stuff. Should we the description of kind of what Willow is for those people who haven't seen it and don't know?
Do that, because it is such an old movie that it may not. I don't think it has the same kind of legs as Star Wars did. In part, as you pointed out last week, because there haven't been a lot of subsequent films made in the world until now. We have a series made in this world, which is one of the reasons why we decided to talk about this movie, is so that we could also then follow up with a discussion about the series that has recently been made. So let's talk about this movie. This movie is a pure fantasy film that was written by George Lucas. He did not direct this, but he wrote it. And of course, it's got, ILM, wonderful ILM stuff incorporated into it to help with that fantasy feel. But it's essentially a sort of chosen one journey kind of story in a magical world with absolute magic, as well as I think there were dragons. It's got a dragon in it, right?
Sort of a dragony thing, yeah.
Yeah, dragony thing. We'll call it a dragony thing. So it's got a race of little people very similar to the Hobbit. It's got the big people, the Daikini, which between us I think is a very strange name.
Yeah, I agree.
So the bikini people, that's what I always thought when I was younger. Soldiers, fighting, lots of sword fighting, scary hunting dogs, very much like the wargs from the Lord of the Rings universe. So it's very easy to make comparisons between this movie and the Lord of the Rings, though this movie is very different from that.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. You can definitely tell this is a George Lucas type story, and that it's his attempt to create a Star Wars like story in a pure fantasy setting. There are a lot of parallels between this movie.
What are some of the parallels that you spotted?
For example, you got this. It starts off with this young farmer, right, out in the kind of in the middle of nowhere, in his little community, getting called onto this adventure, much like with Luke. You have the
and a young farmer who is unhappy in his circumstances, like Luke. Yeah,
and he gets this call to adventure right off the start, and of course he turns it down. Initially, he's like, "Put that baby back in the water, just let it float down the river. We don't want any part of that." He initially turns it down, and then he's called to action again and goes on this journey. And then you've got lovable rogue, the scoundrel with Mad Mardigan, Val Kilmer's character, much like Han Solo, a princess type character, Sorsha.
And much like if you like, don't mind me jumping in with the Lord of the Rings comparison, much like the way the movie tried to turn Aragorn into a bit of a scoundrel.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
And then you've got the farmer wants to learn magic, right? He wants to become a Jedi, but now he wants to become a sorcerer.
Yeah.
So a lot of similarities like that, right? And then there's just the general evil person that's taking over the lands and destroying, whole castles and cities, much like the Death Star was doing. So I saw those parallels. Did you see others?
Oh yes, absolutely. He's got to rescue the princess, who is Elora Danan, the baby, but she's the princess of Tirzleen, so he's got to rescue the princess. And he's got his funny sidekicks with the brownies, who are C-3PO and R2-D2, and he gets the magic wand, which is like the lightsaber, but doesn't mean it doesn't work. And I think it's okay that we have those elements in place again, because I think it does
I agree.
work.
And I think another parallel, like perhaps the overarching one, is the theme of believing in yourself, right? Luke at the end had to believe in himself and trust the Force and take the shot that destroys the Death Star. Same thing here. It's like Willow doesn't believe in himself. He's like, hesitant to say what he thinks, to the well, I forget what the Great Alderaan or whatever the guy's name was, the sorcerer who was testing him. He has to learn to believe himself at the end. So the kind of overarching theme is there as well.
But the other thing that I think you're absolutely right is it's trusting in yourself, but also relying on your strengths. And so with Luke Skywalker, yeah, the Force is with him, but what he was doing with the Death Star is shooting,
exactly, yeah,
womp rats,
already done.
which was his strength. His hit flying and aim and firing the weapon from his moving vehicle was his strength. In the same way that at the end of Willow beats Bavmorda not with his magic, but with his sleight of hand skills. Yeah.
Yes.
And we did warn people at the beginning of and the movie is what, 30 how many years old? So
yeah, it doesn't really take away from the movie knowing that anyway.
It doesn't at all. It doesn't at all.
Yeah, no, but you're right. And I think those themes and characters and plot movements, they're not just in, George Lucas stories. They're very common, and they can work in any kind of story. You can even do them again and again, and it's all about the execution while it works.
Exactly. So let's talk about Madmartigan, who is the Val Kilmer character.
Okay, I'll go first. For me, Madmartigan is the standout character of this movie. And
yeah,
you have to give the credit, I think, to the actor. Val Kilmer, just in all the roles he's in, I think he just really goes for it and really brings his personality and joy into the role. And I think we see that so much here. He's just the way he plays from the very beginning, he's trying to convince them, and then he's just toying with them the whole time, trying to see what works. And then seeing him turn to the sort of good guy, at the like over the course of the story, and then at the end. I think he plays that so well. And it's so fun.
Let me ask you a question, because I agree. I think in some ways, this is almost Madmartigan's story instead of Willow's story. Even though we start with Willow and we end with Willow, the evolution that we see in Madmartigan is significant. Yeah. When you think of that perspective,
I don't think you're crazy.
Do you think I'm crazy?
It's funny because I've had people tell me that Han Solo is the protagonist and the hero of Star Wars. I think it's for the same reason, because his change is more obvious. And I think it's the same thing here. But I think it's even more so in Willow, because Madmartigan plays such a significant role. He's such a more vibrant character. And because he's a swordsman, right? When you first encounter him, he says he's this great swordsman. You don't know whether to believe him or not. But then when you see him in action, he's phenomenal. He practically destroys this whole army attacking the castle single-handedly. He's got all these traps set up, and he's fighting, taking people out left and right. It's amazing. The dude is super impressive. So he's very active. He's the one who kind of does all the action, right? So yeah, I see what you're saying. And, no offense to poor Willow. Willow's kind of a more tempered down character. He's a little flatter, more even-keeled, right? So certainly, Madmartigan really stands out in this movie.
And I will say that I appreciate the character bringing so much levity to the story.
I was going to say the same thing. There's a lot of that throughout, right? This story, the film, I should say, isn't super serious. It's kind of like Star Wars in that way, right? It's like we talked about this last week. where people die and then, they move on, right? Like, let's not dwell too much on the dark stuff. Let's use it just to, propel the story and make it fun. We see a lot of this, right, with Madmartigan and with the brownies. There's a lot of joking that happens and some silly things, but I think it works. It keeps the tone of the story from getting, too intense and too dark.
Agreed. And I do think actually it is I agree, it's a much lighter story than Star Wars.
Right. It's a fun action adventure
story. It's a fun little romp.
It's very, it's like, it's a very, I don't want to say standard, but it's a straightforward fantasy story, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I like here what we see with Madmartigan and Sorsha, who is the daughter of Bavmorda, the bad guy. There's this relationship that takes place that, again, we've got the parallels with Star Wars because Princess Leia is the daughter of Vader. So, and then in the second movie, The Empire Strikes Back, we have the relationship start to form between Han Solo and Princess Leia. Yeah. And so here, they just sort of squish that all together with Madmartigan having, falling in love with Sorsha, the daughter of the bad guy. But it works. I think it works. I think it, and I think it adds that another level of charmingness to the story.
Gives you a sort of fairy tale feel, which I think this movie is kind of right. The movie feels like a fairy tale as a whole. You step back and look at the beats and what happens. Doesn't it kind of feel that way to you?
I agree. So the other thing that I think is interesting when you compare it to Star Wars is that we've got this General Kell, or Kale. Sounds right. Is it Kale?
Yes.
with the bone mask. Right. So he's the Darth Vader character, the one who's essentially the muscle putting the bad guy's plans into place. And so I think that's where we really differ from Star Wars, because in Star Wars it was the Emperor telling everybody what to do. Here it's Bavmorda telling everybody what to do. Vader was implementing all of the Emperor's orders. Here it's this General Kale implementing Bavmorda's orders, but he does not have the same presence as Vader did.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's an interesting difference there.
Yeah, that's true.
What did you like most about it?
I think okay. I like that it's fun and light, right? And then it's Lord of the Rings tends to get really deep at times. That came the movies came much later than this story, but this story kept to a fairy tale, fun action adventure romp, like you said, in the vein of a Star Wars. I liked that feel to it. I think the thing, that really stood out the most was Madmartigan. I think we see Val Kilmer shine. Did you see the documentary, the sort of self-documentary that he did on Netflix, I think it was?
No, I didn't. Is that something?
He was basically filming himself
throughout
his career, even before his career, when he was young and in like high school or maybe even middle school, I'm not sure. Acting with his brother and his family and stuff like that, doing their own little videos and things, up through, the movies that he was doing. And he talks about like what was going on in his life at that time and things like that. But one thing you see from an early age throughout his career, this guy just loved acting. He loved getting into different characters and different roles. And you see that in so many of his movies. And I think that's why he was able to play such different characters. He wasn't just Val Kilmer as this person, right? He became that person, like in Tombstone, right? He's a totally different character than he is in Willow, or than he is in Real Genius, or than he is in Top Gun. So I think he's the shining star of this movie. I think without Val Kilmer, the movie wouldn't be as good as it is, in my opinion.
I will have to say that on rewatching it, what I really liked most about it was just how much warmth and heart it had.
Give me some examples.
When Willow returns to his wife, the scene of the reunion is so touching to me. I had forgotten how very warm and, just lovely that was. And all the little images of Elora Danon's face. I don't know how long they must have had a camera on. I don't know how many babies. I don't know if she's a twin or not. To get all the delightful, charming expressions that they inserted through the movie, giving it so much warmth and so much. I mean, it's just every time I saw that,
I think that's true. I think you're right. I think
they
do a good job of keeping the tone nice, right? Like it's a good-hearted movie.
Yeah.
Doesn't.
Yeah. I mean, yes, Bavmorda is scary, but you never really felt like the baby was in any real danger. Yes. Because it's a child-friendly movie. True. So, and I liked that.
I think, much like in Star Wars, I would make the first act move a little more quickly. I felt it kind of wandered a bit early on. It was just, I was losing focus as to what was going on, what they were trying to do. But again, not much. Just that probably comes with the faster pace that we're used to now. Again, but I would try to do something with that. Tighten up that first act a bit. I think you could probably introduce Mad Mardigan sooner, because, like you say, I think he's kind of he's almost hero of the story in a way, or at least right up there, right? If he's not, if you don't want to see him that way, that's fine. But you can't argue the significance of that character, not just because he's fun to watch. I think because he plays such a big part of the story, and because he has a significant role. So I think by tightening up that first act and pulling him in sooner, I think you get into the meat of the story and the fun a little bit more quickly. The story itself is pretty straightforward, right? It's a fairly simple linear story. I think you could add a little bit more complexity in the plot. Maybe just have one more dramatic act turn or plot twist or something just to spice it up a little bit. These are small things. I mean, it's a fairly straightforward story.
I
think the one thing I really noticed that kind of stood out to me as a little odd was Sorsha and Mad Mardigan's relationship. Her change from implementing her mother's will to throwing in with Mad Mardigan and Willow was kind of quick. And it was basically just because Mad Mardigan, said he loved her.
Yeah.
One night. She's like, okay, I guess I'm on their side now. I would have liked to have seen her develop the change of heart, not solely because of that, but also because she saw how awful her mother was and what they were doing, and said, you know what, I'm on the wrong side. Not just because she liked Mad Mardigan.
And that would have been very easy to do with just a few shots of her frowning at someone being tortured, or, arguing with her mom. Do we have to do so much violence and damage and destruction? Something like that. It could have been very simple to do within a few seconds. It was
weak, in my opinion, right? It was basically Bavmorda's advisor saying, "Oh, she's going to turn on you." Like, that was like way too, on the nose. When we could have just seen her, like you said, give a look, squint when her mother gave her this horrible order or something. It could have been done. That could have been done a little bit better with more nuance. And I think her change of side too quick and took away from her character. Yeah,
agreed. I think the only thing, I mean, I agree with you on with all the suggestions that you make. And what I would add to that is, I'm a big fan of getting a glimpse into the world building behind the story. And so I would have loved to have seen more layers of what the world history was, the culture, why do the Daikini not like the Nelwyns? It came across as just because they're jerks. But people aren't usually jerks just for the sake of being a jerk. So what was behind that? I would have liked to have seen some of the texture in that. And I realized that, I've been spoiled by The Lord of the Rings. And J.R.R. Tolkien developed the world of the Lord of the Rings over a lifetime. Whereas George Lucas likes to make films, so he can't spend his whole life just building a world for Willow.
That's a good point.
Completely reasonable.
It brings up another thing
I think I would have liked to have seen just a little bit more layering.
The different races kind of nasty to each other. And when they're joking, it's like, the brownie's like, stupid Daikini this, and, stupid pack. Like, everyone's just kind of like mean toward the other group. I think that was more acceptable humor back in the day. Because now it's more like, why are you doing this? It's kind of borders on like bullying or othering people. Another thing, and this isn't anything to do with what I would change, but now that we've gotten back into that world with the TV series, and we see kind of way into the future, right, where Laura Dannon's grown up, and they talk about adventures that Madmartigan and Sorsha had back in the day. It really makes me wish we had seen another movie with going on an adventure and seeing what that was, flesh out the world a little bit more back then. That would have been great. I think I wanted a little bit more complexity in the plot, I think. Overall, I enjoyed it. I was a little concerned when it started. Like I said, I felt it started a little slow, and I was like, uh-oh. I had good memories of it from seeing it when I was younger, and I had never seen it since. But then once it got going, it was just fun to watch. It didn't blow me away, right? It's no Star Wars. It's not breaking huge new ground. Some of the effects obviously don't hold up, but it's for the age, it's fine. You can overlook some of that stuff. I was a little disappointed in retrospect with sort of a lack of creativity, given how much we saw in Star Wars, right? And I know George Lucas didn't direct this, but he was he wrote in, he was part of the production. I expected there to be more creative things, like different creatures. And if you look at Star Wars, you got the droids, and you got the Wookiee, and you got all these creatures in Mos Eisley, and you've got lightsabers and land speeders and Death Star. So many unique creative things. And in here, it's like had like the Borg type dog things that come after them, and you have the troll dragonish things, and that was about it.
Yeah. Well, I actually did read something where this movie forced ILM to create a new morphing technology that we saw when the sorceress Rizal transformed from a goat into a bird, and all the transformations that she went through. And that was actually brand new technology that they developed. And I suspect, again, like everything else in the movie world, it's all comes down to how much money is available.
I was actually surprised how good some of those morphing
special effects. And so I think they may have spent most of their money on that.
Yeah, that held up pretty surprisingly well. I was impressed.
Yeah, that was brand new technology developed for this movie.
I had some thoughts on the pig. I loved when they come up to Bev Morta's castle, very imposing black castle. It was awesome, and she's just like laughing, like, "What? This is the group that you send to come after me?" And then she just immediately turns them into pigs. There's like no discussion. It's like, all right, you're all pigs now. I thought that was funny, and at the same time, kind of horrifying when you see the transformation. Right.
It was funny and it was horrifying. And my thought at that moment was, why didn't they know this was coming? I mean, Rizal and Sorsha knew Bavmorda's skills.
Yeah.
I was kind of like, oh, okay. But again, it's a movie aimed at children.
I thought they could have played that a little bit more, because there's like this horrifying thing. They're turned into pigs. Like, oh no, our whole army is just gone, like in an instant. And then 2 minutes later, it's resolved. Oh, that was super easy, barely an inconvenience.
Would you have, for example, had the pigs somehow knock down the doors to the castle and like invade the castle? It was just like the stampede of pigs.
It was that's a huge thing.
That would have actually been
lost
interesting.
Your army, like all your friends are now pigs, and it was just like, okay, I fixed it, no problem. We're moving on. It seemed like, I don't know. Like you said, I think they didn't want to dwell on some of that stuff too much.
Yeah. And you know what? Again, like you pointed out, the expectations of story are very different now. And so it's very easy to look back,
That's
with
true.
the
I
lens of
think
hindsight and say, oh, you should have done
a
this, should
lot
have done
of
this, should have done
the
this. But at the
thinking
time,
about
it was a fun movie.
stories and structures and how you craft a story and create character development and, do structure and twists and things like that. I think it's a fairly recent phenomenon, right? In the last few decades. Prior to that, it was just like you hoped your writer came up with something interesting, and you filmed it and hope it came out well. And maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think there was a lot of story analysis going on, other than just sort of the intuitive analysis that people had. It's not revolutionary, but it's an enjoyable watch with some good acting, some good scenes. Yeah. Check it out.
Agreed. So we invite our listeners to join us next week when we start talking about the new Willow series that has come out on Disney+. I'm looking forward to that. In the meantime, remember to visit Michael's website, which the link will be in the show notes below, as well as mine. You can check out the progress bar on his website to see how far he is on his books, and the audio chapters for my books are coming out. They come out every Friday. On YouTube, you can find those on YouTube. And as always, we really appreciate when everybody likes and subscribes and clicks the notification bell. Thanks very much, Mike. This has been awesome once again. Everybody have a great day, and we'll talk to you again soon.